Welcome to the MoonPath Press book release reading for Alice Derry and Suzanne Edison. We'll be hearing from Alice in her book, Asking, and from Suzanne's book, Since the House is Burning. I'm Lana Heckman Ayers, and I'm the managing editor at MoonPath Press. And I'd like to welcome you all, and thank you all for being here on this delightful Sunday. Alice Derry will be reading for us first, and then Suzanne, followed by a period for conversation, comments, questions from all of you and with each other. Then we'll close out the reading with a poem, a final poem from each poet, because that's a lovely way to say good afternoon with the poems still resonating in our ears. Asking is Alice Derry's sixth full-length collection of poetry. Derry received her MFA from Goddard College, which is now Warren Wilson. She's professor emerita at Peninsula College in Port Angeles, Washington, where she directed the Foothills Writer Series for decades. She helped plan the Raymond Carver 75th birthday celebration and was its keynote address speaker. Derry lives and works on Washington's Olympic Peninsula. I'd like to invite you, Alice, to unmute and read. Thank you, Alice.
Hi, everybody. It's just so nice to see all your beautiful faces and all the different MoonPath authors. It's lovely. I want to thank all of you for giving up your Sunday afternoon to enjoy poetry, and especially to extend my thanks to Lana, who is bringing so many wonderful poetic voices into the Northwest. Lana, you're just doing just a wonderful service to the world. And I know that it's a lot of work. I like to begin reading with a short meditative poem to help us get ready for listening. And today I'm going to read one from June Jordan, who is a poet I admire a great deal. These poems are the things that I do in the dark, reaching for you, whoever you are. And are you ready? These words, they are stones in the water running away. These skeletal lines, they are desperate arms for my longing and love. I am a stranger, learning to worship the strangers around me. Whoever you are, whoever I may become. Well, this reading and the book Asking is necessarily a meditation on death. I lost my husband suddenly in 2014, talking to him around 1 p.m. and then finding his body a few hours later. That doesn't mean that the reading today has to be morbid or certainly not despairing, even though I've certainly been in both those places, and all of those of you who have lost a loved one, you've been there too. But the poems, I think, are a way to embrace our mortality, face it square on, and move forward with the job of living. And that's what the living have to do. They have to go on living. And when someone dies, that can be a really hard lesson. And I think the book also honors somebody that I love deeply and our little family. Now that we've lost so many people to COVID, all of us really are in this lane. And I hope that these poems can help us embrace that and understand it. I make references to lots of birds and flowers in my poems, and you might not know all of them, and you don't have to worry about that. You can just say, oh, I'm thinking of a dahlia, or I'm thinking of a tulip. I'm sure if you have been in this place that you have also experienced the sense of both power and otherworldliness that you feel when someone dies. Death is such a powerful force. So the rest of the world goes on, the planet spinning in its daily habit and ignores you. But at death, a certain threshold is crossed, and I think we all know about that. And for those of you in the room who have given birth, it is also a threshold. And I can remember that moment, even after all these years, so very clearly when my daughter was handed herself as she was born. But the difference is huge. And I think one of the main things is that a baby comes into the world with flesh. And we know what to do with flesh. What we don't know what to do with is what may be in the world after death. So this is called Deepening of a May Night. How visible the world becomes when one we love is taken from it. Mist wraps house and valley, rain saturated earth, returning what it cannot hold. I see deeper as spring extends, even on an evening obscured. Nothingness, also a shape. This afternoon, hail shrapnel felled the tulips. That you died a month ago doesn't keep Coltsfoot from usurping the roadside's ragged verges. When that door opened, you were drawn into the unknown country. This world shuddered, realigned itself. Hidden from me all the years that you were the shield, making private life around our wood-burning stove, its flowering heat, small dailiness. Eyes unveiled, I have lost the ordinary warmth of flannel, a way to collect myself. Like you, each new child makes the dangerous crossing over a threshold. The difference, we can succor, warm flesh, feed hunger. I don't know how to hold you. Nothing you are, I am. Bruce and I, my husband Bruce and I loved so much to pick the wild blackberries that grow here on the peninsula and throughout the western part of the state, those little tiny trailing blackberries that are very sweet and very delicious. And we made jam and we made pies. And that was always a wonderful part of our lives. Picking blackberries, these little blackberries is really rough because you have to go through the old clear cuts and there's holes and there's thorns and so on. One thing that you would like to have happen when someone dies is that time would stop. And the reason that you would like that to happen is because if time doesn't stop, it's going to go on. And this is going to lessen to a degree the acuteness of your grief. And it's also going to fill your life with lots of other things. And then grief itself, the thing you're holding on to, may also disappear and you'll just have nothingness. And so it's out of those thinking that I wrote this poem, Clear Cut and the Stumped Sky. Stop time, stop it growing over the days like blackberry vines, twisting their thorns, their spined leaves through scarred ends of logging. Heal the eroded land, says the universe. Stop healing, new shoots snake forward to root down anywhere and begin camouflage. My friends with their empty berry buckets wave to me, time racing along on its dark, plump rewards. Afternoons with you, the ones we no longer make together, lose detail, slump into shade. Stop memory. Somnolent sweetness carries from the blackberry maze, inviting my face turned to yours, our eyes locked in the knowledge we've found a mother lode. Stop memory, which stops with the past. Stop the way stories have ended, twine and flow from breakfast into lunch while our house, carried on its sunlit afternoon of music, bends toward dinner talk. Stop the end of old camping tales, hyped as rain spatters our tent roof and ruins this trip too. I have to pick blackberries without you, or not at all. I know you're missing Daddy, says my daughter, but some days you are having a good time. and you should admit that. A different person is pushing heavy socks into my old stained sneakers. I don't know her, don't dare, as she spreads the days like covering vines into the slash, hiding uneven ground and sudden treacherous holes. While I keep saying, well, what should come next? I mean, given all the years of me. As the quiet dampness of the great firs, stationary and letting the wind carry their gossip. The great firs, earth systems in themselves, down to the mycorrhizae, are brought to ground. Well, if you have family, you have had to embrace the domestic. And sometimes the domestic is in a lot of conflict with what we imagine our lives to be there in the spiritual world of poetry. But they're always there. A few years after my husband died, our house burned. I still really can't address that subject very well. The shock of the one and then the shock of the other, as if he was erased and then he was being erased again, because he basically built the house. And my daughter lost all of her childhood memorabilia. The room that she had kind of kept in the house was burned, probably the worst of all the rooms. So I wrote this one. Her son was born in 2016, and he carries his grandfather's name for his middle name, and he seems to be mainlining him as well. Every so often he says things and we think, oh my gosh, how did he know that? Anyway, this is called Sweeping. Sweep up the little scraps now and set them away. Your grown daughter is crying. We rarely speak of the house fire. Her child is among us. Oh, that burned, we say, as if nothing mattered but this child. We chat about our dead husband, father, and grandfather as if he sits among us drinking tea. Your daughter is weeping. Important things were lost, not just beds, couches, crammed bookcases. Sweep those up. Tears like rain soak the ashes to unwieldy lumps, immovable. Sweep and let these be each day's burden. Was there a time when waking was to the present? Grant the children those days. When the floor is swept, tomorrow we sweep again. Loss doesn't ennoble. Come, we say to the child, cut out the red hearts, paste them on the cards, one for each classmate, color the figures. We'll all work together. Come. Then we'll ride bikes, and after that, come, then we'll ride bikes, and after that, a snack. You're a grown daughter. It wasn't the time to put your arms around her. Maybe when we are alone. Both of us know sweeping, the dailiness of brooms. We give the domestic its due. Well, when someone dies, then everyone says things to you, and you're the only one that really realizes that nothing anyone says can help, but they're trying, and you love your friends. And so you always answer in ways that will make them feel like they did say all the right things to you. And this friend who's illustrated in this poem was trying to be absolutely perfect in what he said, and after a while it got on my nerves a little bit. So this is called At the Bird Refuge. And again, it has the epigraph, carrying the secure anchor of grief. And that's from Hilma Wolitzer, who wrote an interesting novel on the subject. But there is a sense in which grief is the anchor for a long time. At the Bird Refuge. I know your mind and heart, a friend says, but he doesn't. This small February sun knows it, dissolving the fog bank. Onto the globes of rose hips, sun blasted past fall prime, it pastes the light. This little sun, I want to lie down and roll in. The more I say, yes, it's been a terrible time. What a great guy he was. Thank you for thinking of us. The more he talks over me because he wants to have said the special, truly comforting thing. Rose thorn and towy, sparrow and field grass, this prescient blue affirms the end of snow, not enough to swell our rivers in July. Grieving too might leave me, then it will just be emptiness. I'm jealous that he bicycles on with his still blonde wife, not that young, but athletic. I was braving my walk. I was taking heart in the habit of rose hips and lichen, their heedless loyalty. My heart has no way to be known, doesn't want to be coaxed there. Once roused, it might blast the skies with its wailing. Don't try now, friend. Carry on, willow and Saskatoon, shorn of your leaves. And I didn't mean to imply that you shouldn't talk to people who have lost someone or that you shouldn't try to say anything. Of course you should, because we need our friends desperately. But unless you've been through the experience yourself, well, my friend and I talked quite a bit about it because my husband died, and then I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, her husband died. And she always says to me, I thought I was right with you, but I had no idea what you were going through. Okay, I'm going to close this part with a little poem that bears the title of a line by Elizabeth Woody, who was Oregon's poet laureate at one point, and I always admired her work. And she has this wonderful line, working the light to imagine the making. Working the light to imagine the making, though it's January, gray presses us down. Was it just a trick of light that caught your black hair to your shapely head, gleamed me to you, made me wife, then mother? Even smudged, our star touches clouds with definition, shapes lying against each other like spent lovers, the lounge of being. Works the light now, I tell my dreams, that in the luster shadow of foliage or cedar fans, you would emerge again, sun catching your glasses. But when I reach to hug you as you walk up shore of me on a bouldered beach, my hands press through cloud flesh. I've got to go, you say, and point to the man, your father, already walking on, washed in muted beach light. It's a landscape of rainbows, someone said, of our rain-fed peninsula. Water working cloud light lets us imagine gold just out of reach. As memory ignites in the drift of brightness, opening onto this ledge above the canyon where our house sits, as if a family still woke to work and school, then gathered for the coveted talk over dinner. That kindling says you couldn't be gone. Your hair turned totally white by the time I lost you, and making was in my hands. So, sun's covered again, as mostly it's just the drops themselves, not light stitched onto them. Leaden light, fog dome light, still working. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Anna. What a lovely reading. Thank you so much. Next, we have Suzanne Edison. Suzanne Edison, MFA 2019 Hedgebrook Residency alumna, teaches writing workshops at Richard Hugo House in Seattle. She has taught reflective writing workshops to medical professionals at Virginia Mason Hospital, Seattle Children's Hospital, and the University of Washington Medical Center. She also leads writing workshops with cancer patients and caregivers. Since the House is Burning is Suzanne Edison's debut full-length collection. Suzanne has been a Pacific Northwester for 45 years, so she's almost a native. Please welcome Suzanne.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you, Lana, so much for taking on this book. I really, really appreciate it. You have given me the hugest gift. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Alice, your poems are just so close to heart and soul. Even though I have not lost one, I was looking around the Zoom rooms and seeing people who I know your poems will resonate for most deeply. And Risa, thank you very much for your book review as well. I'm very grateful. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person at AWP also. Thank you, friends. And I'm going to open with a poem that I think sort of encompasses a lot of the themes in this book. If you have your book and you want to follow along, it's on page 49. It's called Fire in the Ice. And I will also mention that Chris Balk, who's on the call, chose this poem for one of a contest in persimmon-tree. Fire in the Ice. I train my muscles to the trail, cache fear under lodgepole pine and cedar trees, strain my eyes toward meadows, long views of Mount Rainier, its tonic of heft, no need to explain, these climate worries, disappearing snow, spears of lightning burning my western terrain, sage, grass, grouse, and house unspared, and cancer spreading like glaciers once did in my sister's bones. Down the scoured valley, I sling laments and howls, swallowed by the river's pockets of guttural boom and surging boulders that urge my lips toward the fevered intent of kissing each blistered pain, each unlocked moment, letting them go without refrain. Just lost my little. I'm going to read a poem that I haven't read out loud before, and somebody mentioned it to me a while ago, and it kind of carries on this theme of fevers and kissing. And even beyond that, I started this poem eons ago in a workshop that Lana was teaching. So it has a lot of resonance to me, but it took years to kind of come to fruition. Fevers. Walking, I thought the threadbare moon cold and restless. Your head could not contain your hands. Branches pine, sag, and you worry about trees, the way leaves sheet the light, our bodies, parallel seductions, thoughts coded in disguise. We want emulsion, a fevered slash, vinegar, oil, dash of water. Knowing excitement lacks certainty, I try to kiss your mouth open to the rain. Somewhere, dogs tied to a fence, howling, not my breath. We skirt a bench. I scoop up a stone, simple object, not dressed in scaffolds. Sycamores straddle a wavering walk. Time is always giving us the slip. My heart drunk in your pocket. We could break. So the title of this book will be revealed in the next poem, but much like Alice was talking about, this book is really an attempt to not just catalog all the difficulties of our times, but to try to point a light into how can we go on living? Where are the sparks of life and creative juices, and what's meaningful to us? My friend claims her second round of cancer. As my Italian father would say, since the house is burning, let us warm ourselves. And so I braid my wreaths of garlic, sweep out those motes that hover like ghosts and fall. Our house slants toward dawn, toward ducks arriving on a brimful pond. I say, let's hunker down, lay ourselves and the breach of stud and nail bare, unhinge the windows. I live near Lake Washington, and I love to go swimming there. And so this one is about a little bit about that. Late blue moons. My shutters open to rarity. Record heat all summer. Bloody sunset, smoked out sky, rage of forests on fire. Tonight, the crenulated mylar shine of moonbeams across the lake flood the bedroom. A photograph of you on a glacier, encrusted beard, pickaxe, goggles, twists on the mirror. Haven't we had enough exposure? The icy slip of Earth's demise dot the papers daily. I shiver now after a late lake dip, swimming out from shore, ignoring the drowned carpet scraps, tires strangling algae in the glacier-carved body of water that was once ice. I hoard photographs of snow. Whatever is wild must melt our great denial that coats us like the Pacific Ocean's debris patch. We must burst like the jack pine seed, scarred, scattered, and charged for generation by fire. How am I doing on time? I'm okay?
You're good.
Good, okay. Those who know me know that I've had a child with a serious illness from when she was young, and she's in remission now. But much of my writing over the last 15 years was because of trying to understand. It took me in this whole other realm of going into the medical world and trying to understand autoimmune diseases and healing and illness. And one of the projects I did when I was in grad school, and I went to grad school very late in life, which was really quite fun, actually. I did a project looking at the visual art in 3 hospitals in Seattle. And if you don't know, the University of Washington Swedish Hospital in Harborview, they have amazing visual art collections. Much of it is 2D, but there's some sculpture, there's some textile art. And so this poem comes from one of the places I was visiting for this project. It's called In the Radiology Waiting Room. No store-bought prints of seascapes. Rather, I investigate the insides of glass boxes hanging on the walls. Sheep guts, the plaque tells me, stretched to look like skin. I'm transfixed by a pair of gloves, hollow and painted blue and gold. No patients in the clinic's room look up, their heads bent to screens or frayed magazines. Yet one woman, almost swallowed by a red serape, hunched in her wheelchair, eyes me sideways. I photograph the notes hidden in the glove's wrinkled palms. Lend a hand, my time is at hand. Given the unknown results, the possible positive shadow, I think, in case of emergency, break glass. What if I did grab the gloves, crack the wall of dull air, the patient silence, slip them onto my hands, touch the woman waiting? So following on that, I did another project where I interviewed lots of people who either live with autoimmune diseases or caregive people with those diseases or research or medical providers. So this is kind of received information that I've synthesized into a poem. It's called The Body Lives Its Undoing. Like that Hopi word, koyaanisqatsi, life out of balance, or the Inuit one, uganeaktuk, to behave strangely. My body is in self-arrest, the victim, perpetrator, jailer. I am a heaving glacier, clattering tending to cacophony. I am the kinglet droves giving way to a swelter of crows. I could be the roughened rumble of cells awry, one gene or more, scratching out a mixtape of chaos. Because the mayor of my body handed over the keys to invaders, I am cascading through flames, joints and muscles dragging like a loose muffler on asphalt, fighting off one illness, then another. I am not unlike the polar bears, stranded on shrinking ice, chuffing and growling alarms, while out of melting permafrost, a viral storm rises. I want to know how to be this turbulent sea, a solo boat listing, and a sailor, my hand on the tiller. This is the first poem in the book, moving a little bit towards a little bit more joy. We should not wait for fruit. Once I lived with my lover in the hyperbole of petals and penumbra, ravenous as termites and the flickers who mined them. We bent to each other as if to salt licks and lived in gauzy oblivion to nightly siren sweeps and the morning cavalcade of crows. We erupted like avalanche lilies through snow, profuse, skimping at nothing. Decades now, past the verge of vernal, a cane by the bed, you press your cottony head towards mine, and like a salve, pour out an unearthed story about a wounded dog found in weeds you carried home. It's then I melt towards you, believing I taste grass on your lips, sip of bitter and bright, as we roll over, find our sway, and let gravity take us deeper, drunk as bees in fuchsia. I think I have time for one more before we go to questions.
Yes.
Okay. Seaside vacation with the, oh no, that's not the one I want to read. Sorry. The face of it. In dying, my husband doesn't wear, oh, I should say, this is not actually about my husband. So I apologize to those of you who have actually lost your husbands. This is about a dear friend of mine, actually my sister-in-law losing her husband. The face of it. In dying, my husband doesn't wear a death mask. Think of the rock aster's center, its petals wind-whipped, shattered, the spiral of harmonies hovering close to the ground. Some days he's fog-bound, and I play him recordings of canyon wrens, their mating trills cascade, reminding us of plateaus above their cake layers of iron, pressed lime and sand, lichen fuzzed whiskers on stone. I remember his once long strides, drawing him far ahead. We used to imagine we were early explorers, startled like grouse flushed from sage by the sudden yawn of plunging crevasses. We were speechless as fire ants, but just as sharp, living then as now in wide open territory. Thank you. I'll save another one for later. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your attention and time.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was a beautiful reading, really beautiful. I want to invite everyone now to unmute yourselves, to ask questions, to make comments, to have conversation with each other. whatever you'd like to do. Feel free. I know that Suzanne and Alice had some comments for each other that they wanted to make.
So Alice, what I love about this book is this constant, the arc of the book and how it moves from just really the painful kind of shocked reality of the loss and the grief, and I think I share with you this sense of the natural world being so important to your healing and life, sort of the before, the middle, and whatever comes next. And so I love several of the poems that you've already read. There's one called A Quarter Note where you talk, where there's a lot of synesthesia. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, your experience of the natural world with synesthesia. So you talk about you feeling big leaf maple's final shine. You're listening for yellow's quarter note. And you hear just the red's deep gong. So the hearing of colors, the feeling of sounds. Could you say something about that?
Thank you for a beautiful analysis of that poem. I appreciate it. I do feel that often colors have sounds. They feel like they do. And so it comes up occasionally, but I can't say that I spend a lot of time thinking about synesthesia, although I sure enjoyed teaching it to my students. It was always a fun word to say as well. But I haven't written that many poems in which it occurs, but in this particular one, I don't know if you've ever driven down the Hood Canal in the fall, but the trees overarch often the road, and the colors are, well, they just sound of music all the time. And I think my husband and I argued constantly about what you might perceive and what the real world was. And he always took the real world side. And so, I know that the poem hovers around that, don't be silly or whatever he says there in the poem.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid I might not have answered your question very well.
You did fine. One of the things I really appreciated, for any of you who haven't seen Alice's book yet, she talks a lot about references to Hamlet. So I really want you to speak more about that, because I felt like your analysis, if you read the notes later, about Hamlet really being about grief was such an eye-opener to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I taught Hamlet so many times to so many students that even though I'm really a poor memorizer, lines would just pop up. Something would happen and a line from Hamlet would pop into my mind. That's how relevant the play is. And we used to laugh about that as a family, because I would say something, and that the undiscovered country that was in the one poem, that's from Hamlet. And I guess that I spent a lot of years arguing with all the critics, not really in person, but just on paper, about, people often disparage Hamlet and say, well, it's not a rounded out play. It doesn't do this, and Ophelia is this way and Hamlet is that way. And that always irritated me, because it is my favorite Shakespeare play, because I really feel that he delves into the lives of young people and what it must be like to be in a situation that, caught between power and love, really. And so, they always say, oh, well, he didn't act soon enough. Well, what do you mean? Someone going to go out and murder somebody? As soon as you murder somebody, you're in a different territory than you were before you murdered somebody. So why would we expect him, whom we are supposed to admire, to rush out and murder the king, etc.? I can go on and on and on and on. And so then when my husband died, I realized this is a poem, this is a play about grief. And I haven't probed the literature enough to know if there are some good articles about that. But it was very clear to me that both these young people are suffering from extreme grief. And extreme grief causes you to do all sorts of weird and strange things. So the play then makes complete and total sense, which you never can stuff it into the other drawers that people are always trying to pull out for Hamlet, but it fits everything if you say it's a play about grief. So then I thought, okay, the whole book is going to have all these fancy references to Hamlet, but of course that didn't happen. I have a few references to Hamlet, so I salvaged it a little bit. It's just the way it goes in the writing of poetry.
Thank you.
Really interesting. The first scene of that is all about grief.
Pardon me?
The first scene of
Yes.
Hamlet.
Yes.
That's what it's about. It's like
yeah.
the first line of a poem, you know.
Yes.
It tells
Yes.
you something.
Not seems, madam, is, right?
Well, Alice, I think it was good that you did not include all of those passages that popped up, allowing us to fill in some of those, which your poems really bring out.
Thank you. Fred and I had collaborated much of our teaching lives together. And the last book that I brought out from Lana, he and I did a wonderful reading where he played his cello and I read poems. It was the very best.
Suzanne, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your work in the hospital, how that influenced or spurred on some of the poems in this book. I know it's a big question.
The teaching or the
Either
project?
one.
Yeah.
The project, it seems, is a little closer to the book, but I don't know. You know.
Well, these poems range over the last 7 years, maybe, or they think back to earlier times, even if I hadn't written them back then. I guess I'll give a little bit of the background for those who don't know it. My daughter was diagnosed when she was 6 with a rare autoimmune disease that completely upended my life at that moment. I quit my job as a landscape designer. I had a background before as a psychotherapist, and I had been writing poetry on the side, but poetry became my way of saving myself, basically. And as a result of trying to understand this rare disease and, doctors and hospital visits, and I knew that I also needed support on my journey. And I thought, if I need support, other people need support. So I started a support group because there wasn't any at Seattle Children's. And after about a year in the support group, I sort of morphed it into a writing workshop for parents who have kids with rare illnesses of any kind or chronic illnesses. They don't have to be rare, just chronic. Mental health as well as physical health, because they aren't separate. And that just started me on this whole trajectory of developing writing workshops for caregivers, writing workshops for medical professionals. It started me on this journey of trying to give voice to those people who usually aren't given voice, people with writers can write, but there are lots and lots of people who have rare and chronic diseases who aren't writers, and I felt like they needed to have their voices heard as well. And the caregivers themselves rarely have their voices heard. So that was a large project that I did. The Body Lives Its Undoing, one of the chapbooks that poem, The Body Lives Its Undoing, is from also, was that whole project. And And then the visiting hospitals, because I had spent so much time in and out of Children's Hospital, Seattle Children's, and then I lost about 5 either family members or very close friends in the 2 years that I was in graduate school, getting my MFA. And so I was back in hospitals quite a lot and thinking about art and looking at art. And that led to that project of trying to figure out what why was art so important to all of us. And I think, Chris, does that kind of answer your
Yeah, no,
question?
that helps a lot. I just want to thank you for your bringing art into the hospital setting that way, and bringing the hospital illness setting into your art. As the parent myself of a child with chronic disabilities, I really, really appreciate that. And I think of you often when I go into UW, and you're part of a whole movement where, there is beautiful artwork in the UW hospitals. And I also have to say, Alice, I am so moved by your willingness to step into grief and yet not be out of the world. You are so grounded in the world. And I think I just really thank both of you for your beautiful writing.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Chris. I always appreciate all of your work as well. I wondered, well, we had traded books kind of late because I'm behind always. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I opened Suzanne's book and started reading it, and I realized, okay, now I know why Lana set us together in reading.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate that so much about our 2 books, how well they connect to each other. And
Yes.
even though, thank goodness you haven't lost your partner, you've been through plenty to appreciate those same depths. And I think they show up in the poems beautifully.
Thank you. Yeah, I immediately had that same sensation, like, oh, I know why Lana put us together now. So smart, Lana.
Well, before we close with a poem from each of you, I just wanted to ask both of you if you had any surprise or interesting new awareness that came about when you put these poems together as a book. I mean, we write poems individually. We don't, at least I don't, when I'm writing poems, think, oh, I'm writing a collection. But just in the process of putting this together as a manuscript for a book, did you have any kind of insights or something that you didn't expect?
Well, this is my first book as a full manuscript, so it was all a surprise to me. And it was hard, I think for me, what was really hard was figuring out the order and how did one poem speak to the next, and what was there actually this one woman keeps asking me, what's the arc of your book? And I said, I don't really know what the arc of my book is. Maybe somebody else can tell me that. What was really important to me, and I think Lana helped me work on this, was I didn't want all the really depressing and down and sad poems in one section. And there are so many of them that I had to spread them out and make sure that there was some uplift in each of the sections. So that was important to me. And to begin the book and to end the book with some kinds of with some uplift and joy. And I think the other piece that was important, and for those of you who've worked with Lana as an editor, you're probably well aware, she's so gifted and masterful. And so I had sent this manuscript to her and she said, could you send me more poems? And I just thought, well, really? Okay. So I sent more poems and she managed to put them in a place that was so fantastic. So I was really grateful for that. That's what I can tell you about my surprises.
Well, thank you. That's really kind, Suzanne. What about you, Alice?
Well, I think that you correctly assessed that, Suzanne. One of the most difficult things is putting together a collection. Writing the poems is hard, but trying to figure out which poems go after which one, because the book itself is going to become a poem. And I think it's extremely difficult. I've relied on my friend Tess Gallagher for a lot of help that way. She's very good at arranging manuscripts. But in this particular book, the arc of the book, I think was, I just want to say it fell into place much more clearly and easily than other books I have written, partly because there is an arc to the experience. And so you can string the poems along it. I did have a lot of sections in this book, way more than I usually do. And that was to give a lot more breadth, because I felt that these poems are not easy and we want to give the reader lots of space. And so that's why even in the end, I had those 3 sections that went in that one kind of section. I did get help from a couple people and I altered a few things in terms of like what was the first poem and so on. But other than that, it did go together well. I can only agree with all the things you said about Lana. So.
Both of your books have such beautiful breadth and balance. I mean, they're really just stunning collections. So what I'd like to do is just say a few words and then invite our 2 poets to close with a poem. I want to thank all of you in the audience for being here. Asking and Since the House Are Burning are both available from our poets if you'd like to get signed copies. They're also available from your local booksellers. You can also get them on bookshop.org or IndieBound. And of course, B&N, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon have these books available as well. I hope that you'll come back and listen in our next book release reading, which will be for Risa Denenberg and Joanne Clarkson on January 14th, and I'll be sending out reminders about that. That'll be a wonderful reading. And until then, visit the MoonPath Press website if you can, and look at all our poets and their wonderful collections. So right now, I'd like to invite Suzanne to read a final poem, and then Alice.
Thank you. Thanks again, everybody. This is called Seaside Vacation with the Dead. Maybe it is the shriveled spiders on the rug at the Cliff House, long dead and trapped inside, looking like tiny hot air balloons that tell me these beasts were fornicating and feasting more than I. Maybe it is the scraping sound of sowbug shells sucked up and spinning in the vacuum I employ that reminds me of the Asian lady beetle carapaces, dozens scattered on my dining table that greeted me years ago. Then my mother had been dead less than a day, and I was not there to feed her ice chips, soothe, rattle, and wheeze, or shroud with my body the carcass of her last breath. My memory opens like a slash of flesh. I watch evening hug the swelling redbud limbs as bats drain the air of insects. But I am not here to grieve. I want to know about the living to come, how to navigate by scent, how the tree grows around a nail into which its point has bitten. Thank you.
That is such a beautiful poem, Suzanne. And once again, I think it demonstrates your amazing ability with language. I loved savoring all your words. I'm going to read a poem called More Light. According to my husband, these were Goethe's last words, and I don't know if they were or not, but he would have said Mehr Licht anyway. But Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was probably Germany's most important writer and still is. He wrote Faust, just to help you remember who he is. Anyway, I'm just bringing him up so you won't say, oh no, I don't know who she's talking about. My students often asked me, now, how about this German writer Goethe? So we've had some interesting ways of dealing with Goethe. More light, you always vowed, were Goethe's last words. Hummingbird whirring at the feeder, vulture, high coasting, both seize this sparse February twilight. I know you couldn't help leaving me. On this night, decades ago, we first slept together, two hungry bodies, then the trusted back to back in sleep. I've no real way to get out of this life, no courage there. Lying if I said I didn't want to be with our daughter, our grandson. You remember, for a little while, to be the one adored, doing everything right. When he says, Alma, come live with me forever. I want to. Forget sleep for a while, my love. Come to me. Thoughts, dreams, any way you can.
Thank you so much, Alice. and
Gorgeous.
Suzanne. Beautiful work. I wish all of you well, stay well, be well, and embrace poetry in your lives in whatever ways you can.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Lana. Thanks everybody for
Thank you
coming.
so much for coming, everyone. It's so nice to see your beautiful faces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Beautiful, Alice and Suzanne. Thank you so much. Really nice way to end this sunny day.
There's still some light, more light.
There's a little bit out there.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's in the treetops now.
it
Yeah.
is.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good
Night.
night.
Good night, all.